Well, welcome back. Now, Trade and Industry and Competition Minister Ebrahim Patel earlier this week told Parliament that the government's proposed scrap metal policy will make it harder to sell stolen scrap metal. Some were expecting a total ban for several months. The theft of scrap metal and copper cable from public infrastructure and private companies has been a burden for the country. I want to bring in Nancy Strachan, who is the CEO of the Recycling Association of South Africa. Nancy, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. So the cost of this theft to the economy, Nancy, exceeding about 46 billion rand. That's an enormous amount. It comes from that so-called TIPS report on the impact of the theft. Maybe let's start with that first question. Does that report spell out the entire story?
Unfortunately, it doesn't, and that's where some of our issues are, is that it doesn't show the full truth of what the situation is.
And I mean, and that's why you have so many sectors here, in particular the public sector, the private sector, companies that are under your umbrella would have been talking to you about this as well. And that old question about whether or not to have a total ban on exports, it seems it might not be a way forward. And I see your group pushing for more emphasis on perhaps countering the theft and illicit trade by making cashless transactions law, for example, making tracing mechanisms more available?
That's correct. We don't believe that trade policy is a way to effectively address infrastructure theft, not only in South Africa, but in the rest of the world. Trade policy has no effect on criminal behavior. Criminal behavior bypasses all legal systems, and trade policy will do nothing to effectively address that.
You know, you said earlier that that TIPS report didn't give out the entire story. And as I said, you've held workshops with many of the recycling companies under your umbrella. What's the sort of experience on the ground there? What's the feedback been?
The feedback from the industry itself and the recycling industry is that they're not being heard or considered in these proposals at all. They've been given 21 days to respond to a policy that threatens to threaten the existence and provide input on it, and they don't think government is even prepared to listen to their inputs or consider the repercussions of what this can have on the legitimate recycling industry.
Well, just talk to me about how this really unfolds, because, you know, I mean, is it a question of probably the country's ability not to police the illicit trade effectively? Is it failing the industry, you think?
I don't think so. The past 3 years, year on year, has shown a decrease in the actual incidence of infrastructure theft by the police. So I do think the police are very effective in the policing of the legitimate industry. It's the criminal syndicates and the organized crime that requires more effective policing. And the only way to address that is to build cooperation between the affected parastatals, the police, and industry itself.
What do you think will eventually happen when it does become policy and law, Nancy? Because I see we're in a period now for public comment that closes very soon, as you say. Where is this shaping? Because you have this huge industry that, if a total ban does get underway, would be severely hit. From your take on what the Trade and Industry Minister Ebrahim Patel is talking about, how do you think this will shape up?
Well, I do think that the hardest hit will be the poorest of the poor. We're looking at the waste pickers of South Africa who survive on between 50 and 100 rand a day from collecting cans and general waste discarded by the public. This will no longer be collected if there's no benefit to them collecting this waste and reselling it so that they can earn a legitimate income. It will be left on the streets uncollected or going to landfill, and we'll be facing perhaps 600,000 people who will be relying on the state for further bailouts.
But it does seem, though, according to what the minister had said in Parliament, that the way forward could be just to put in more traceable mechanisms in place where you identify whether or not a particular item has been stolen. It might be a very difficult task, but perhaps that's the way forward.
It is the way forward, and we say that making the products uniquely identifiable makes it easier for the legitimate industry to ensure it doesn't enter the recycling chain. It makes it easier for the police and law enforcement to prosecute these cases and identify those syndicates that are operating illegally within the industry.
Yeah, so very quickly, how do you think this will end off? I mean, it seems as though we wouldn't get a total ban.
I'm not too sure at this stage, and the industry is sort of resigned to the fact that government is not listening to them. So at this stage, we've got 915,000 people who are currently legitimately employed who are facing the very daunting possibility that they may not have a future in this industry.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how that wades off. Well, thank you very much indeed. Nancy Strachan is the CEO of the Recycling Association of South Africa.